One of the most terrible crimes in the history of the human race is being perpetrated in the city of Seattle right now. And judging by my peers' inability to comprehend what they are doing, it seems to be a sign of the mysterious fall of America. I once had the misfortune to exchange words with G. Gordon Liddy, and I offered as an argument for the reception, which was favorable, that he was receiving, that there was a scene in Tolkien where the men of Rohirrim were advised that the wizard who had formerly been Saruman the White and who had fallen to black magic could woo them with the tone of his voice. Gandalf told them to concentrate on the content of his words, not on his music. And Letty, ever the wit, shot back, that's the problem with people like you. You live in a fantasy world. It does seem to me ironic, since the fantasy of constant war and a world dominated exclusively by white people, which are reasonable criticisms of Tolkien's world, fits the mindset of Letty more than it fits the mindset of me. But there is a scene in Tolkien where the riders of the Dark Lord are being announced by the shocked hobbits of Bree, who are saying, "Fear, fire, foe, wake." And they say, "Let the little people blow." This is an insight from Noam Chomsky added to the totalitarian dimension of America's friendly fascism. Chomsky said, "Don't suppress freedom of speech, nobody cares. Let the little people blow." I'm one of the little people, and I'm going to blow my horn about this matter. If you want to see what I think really happened, this is the best way to apprehend what I think really happened. You see, after he was elected, there was a miscount, supposedly, and he used to hold up a newspaper saying, "Dewey defeats Truman." That's a joke, but the idea was that the joke was on him. It was a exercise in suggestion. Truman believes he beat Hitler. A German from Pennsylvania once told me Ruby had to cross the Rubicon. Caesar had to cross the Rubicon. Well, from the videos in Hunting Hitler, it's clear that J. Edgar Hoover knew every step of the way where Adolf Hitler was. His only attempt to apprehend him at best would have been to get his autograph. Hitler made it to Argentina and was advised by his repertoire in Hollywood every step of the way leading to the assassination of Kennedy. You can see from this frame that doesn't show up on the reel, goes by too fast, that the signature of the attackers is right on the reel of the film. Errol Flynn, who lived in Laurel Canyon with Houdini and met with Hitler, is sitting next to Reagan, who is sitting next to a swastika under Rather Us, with the U.S. prominent over the swastika. There are many suggestions of these throughout my research I've discovered in the semiotics of Hollywood. So we are at an impasse in accepting what really is going on. And it's an impasse about which I have spoken in some of my other videos. Pitt News and the Stranger newspaper in Seattle were both advised for many years of my investigation into the AIDS attack. They had digested all of the mechanisms whereby the right wing had accomplished what they'd done to me, and they piled on, making a laughingstock of me. One of the dimensions of the terrible crime that has been committed is that the attack prostitute hired by Trumpy Toon, a perky little Italian girl from Milan, to detonate the impacted neuroplasm they put when they kidnapped and tortured me as a child. You can see throttling my facial nerve now. Married somebody who she was loyal to long enough to bear children, and his classmates held me in prison in secret in a mental health facility where they terrorized and poisoned me. This is only one dimension of the terrible crime being committed in Seattle. But if you look at Shifty's ventriloquism throughout UW dialectical, you can see that there's a high command involved in targeting people loyal to me or me loyal to them, as though Burstyn in The Exorcist, Reagan in The Exorcist, is moving objects with her mind. Because I would have known, have I known about Cersei Kennedy, would have adored her, they targeted Cersei Kennedy. And so it was the enemy within, moving objects with their mind. They then trace their crime back to me as though I am the problem. And some of this theory of war by proxy puppet was documented by the brother of faggot-faced Lou Carl, one of the most terrible extremists in the U.S. Army. Most of what was done to me, even after the COVID bonus attack, remains a joke in a Catholic boys' club. Ironic, given that the Kennedys also were Catholic. But these men claim to believe in a God larger than the FBI or the U.S. government. Never mind logic. What Lou Carl loses in logic, he makes up for in malice and deceit. He comes from the intellectual heritage of Major Thomas Lane, who said that the spirit was more at peace in righteous war than it was in unrighteous peace, so-called peace of the flesh. This is a way of damning anything that believes in peace. And they damned JFK for believing in peace. Despite his superior grasp, his superior mind, his superior strategy, and his superior understanding that people were moved by love. But this goes back to the dismissal earlier of Henry Wallace, part of the brain trust of Franklin Delano Roosevelt in favor of Truman in the first place, and Jimmy Burns, a South Carolina Lynch candidate who worked on Truman's mind from behind the scenes. FDR understood that Stalin's containment came from the desperate need to protect a society that had borne the weight of Hitler's aggression. Stalin had pleaded with FDR and Churchill again and again to open new fronts against Hitler, and they refused. They knew that Stalin had to fight Hitler no matter what, and he would absorb most of the blow, but FDR wasn't stupid. He knew that Stalin meant to contain that from ever happening again. It wasn't dominoes. It wasn't expansion. It was containment, and there was no reason to meet their containment with containment of our own. Nobody could take seriously nobody could take seriously domino effect who believed that the philosophy of democratic people outshined totalitarianism. Accordingly, we shouldn't have gone the direction of wasting our weapons, missiles, on nuclear bombs. We should have wizened people with educational outreach, the superior motivation of helpfulness and good neighbor policy. Instead, we ended up with the Kennedy assassination and the disastrous wars in Asia. Foolishness of the Vietnam War opened with John Wayne's film The Green Beret, a parrot singing in German of all things. Cultural competence, they say, has led to special pleading by the privileged class of liberals in America. Where does this contempt for the intellectual heritage of the United States get off claiming to be patriot? I'm calling for COVID Nuremberg, of course. I found harbingers of evocation of this tragedy from 2017 in Martin Savransky of Oxford, who talks notoriously in How Does It Feel to Think about confusing dialogues about a pandemic and what he calls the deepening crisis of problems. The deepening crisis of problems has been upgraded into the idea that home invasion in America is legitimate, poisoning an intellectual and a scholar in the mouth to deepen their grasp of problems by the people who deepened our problems by releasing the AIDS attack and COVID-19 is legitimate. What's legitimate about Seattle's aggrandizing mouth poison? The frat cults and militias that have winked at Penis Gabriel's absurd crimes, brazen crimes, are now holding me in a sort of prison of death threat to take my art and make money from it, while clearly being covered for by the very Smithsonian institution that themselves apprehended John Schulman for museum theft, a primary source all along for this monster Penis Gabriel. So when you look at the situation that brought me back out west, the murder of Donnie Chin, you see that it was probably his independence of mind that led to this. There was a woman out here associated with the deadly Chris Arnberg who said when she heard the story of the Pussy Bowl war game at Pitt with the entrapment by the married woman from India who didn't tell me she was married as a dare, was mostly her doing. They were her marriage vows. Donnie Chin was the person who might entertain that. But Shifty said, and backed by a special penis Sinfield from King Crimson who brayed and brayed and brayed to me of his largesse in the manner of Trumpy Tune. They embedded their idea with bullets in Chinatown, and Donnie Chin was shot dead. The overlooked Sovietology of the arms race, the way that the war in Vietnam secretly was meant to empower the Soviet tyrants who Russia was getting the upper hand over, as Gorbachev showed, was seen when Trumpy-toon schmoozed with Putin. The people who were designing the weakening of America were also designing a new partnership of linkage with the tyrants of the world. They themselves regard American intellectual heritage as special pleading and privilege, and they're backed by these fraud cults and militias. So, when you look at the situation that evolved from Pit News and the Stranger, you see their alibi. They said the Mount Desert Island was a tarantella to dance the poison and sexual liberation out, and that it indemnitied me to the mindset of the most notorious perverts in Seattle queerdom at the Warhol, who themselves authored this atrocity on my door in Pittsburgh, a garage door where I would ride my bicycle, was spray painted in a photograph dated 1966 from Kodak, "I love Sarah Silverman." This was in Cyril Wecht's neighborhood. Cyril Wecht lived at East-West Circuit, where a certain gang of persons, Leslie Katz, Martin Eldam, and Thomas Gordon, would loaf. These agents of Warhol mayhem brought together for Cyril Wecht actually were the driving force of Obama's claims during the AIDS attack. And they worked closely with Yoko Ono. And her agent, Gail Burstyn, wrote the script that shows that Paul McCartney's gang all along were behind the murders of Bobby Kennedy, Martin Luther King, and JFK. John Lennon wanted no American to have more charismatic pull over the mind of our young people than he. And he made sure to get all of the ones who had any chance of cushioning the blow of British betrayal out of the way permanently. They claim, in some sort of strange idea of New Age doctrine, that sexual equity is at root of the political process and the equity scythe. Yet, as our society faces a world reaching biological irretrievability, the only people they demand forgiveness for are the people who did us in. They have no remorse about avenging the generation of World War II with a cold-blooded geriatricide. Trumpy-toon laughed through the whole thing. 500,000 Americans, most of them are grannies, are dead. And the spectral hostility for the whole matter came from Yoko Ono. When I first mentioned in one of my essays that a flash of light in our camera was very bright when I was a child, and raised the question of me being targeted as a little boy from the Navy by an acrimonious authoritarian mother who brought me into the world for this play, thinking it's Shakespeare. She heard of it and glared at me most mysteriously. When I was kidnapped and tortured as a child, my brain shut down with a coma-inducing agent. I was held in the house of a man named Donald. The indoctrination by Donald was very heavy in sexual libido abandon, and they used me piteously as a little boy. And they led me to a place called Maxwell House on Mount Desert Island for the AIDS war game. Philosophy for the British is only that which allows foreign English mayhem as good. And so they invented a strange new philosophy. It was important for the British to manufacture exaggerated claims about what they called the queerbait. And in their enormity, they actually sold the idea that virginity proved right, that my restraint with a girl who was in my hands nightly proved that I was a vampire. Strange, strange indeed. And these frat cults and militias of Pitnews the stranger, with their bogus ideas about the tarantella on Mount Desert Island, allowed the situation to remain a joke even after the COVID one. Part of the problem is confusion about the way that celebrity and victimization play out in people's impressions about media. Penis Gabriel was able to challenge the idea in the ideas of the pervert faction who he thrills, that I deserved rescue as a victim because I wasn't a celebrity. Ono was claiming I was trying to outshine Lennon, whom they, by sleight of hand, somehow linked to me in a way that allowed them to claim an innocent person was guilty while promoting the truly guilty. And there's no will in our society to resist poison. There's no will at all. They used me for mutilationism, and the Smithsonian said nothing. Getting the truth, I found that they had, by their sleight of hand, said, well, did you get it your own way, did you? And so it was sitting in front of my eyes all along. Well, now it's sitting in front of your eyes. Lou Carl, his brother Greg, wrote of kidnappings, stealings, and magical agents in mockery, fully advising everyone of what they were doing. And Dr. Ralph Proctor called it a provincial norm. Isn't that something? And they drafted me into Klondike country for the bonus show with their acumen for tinkering through applied largesse. Their acolyte Vaclav Havel used to talk about how terribly entertaining it was. Their mogul, Arnold Schwarzenegger, would say, no mercy, keep it going and connect the dots in one way or another. So the children of war are what they promote as the curtain falls on the arms race. How did Seattle ever become so contemptible that they would help organize an atrocity of our grandparents and say that profiteering was a tribal custody issue? Even knowing who the giants of rabies have been. Well, I guess that's all I have to say about it right now.